Turtle is one of Magic's oldest creature types, originally making its debut in 1994's Legends. It was also retroactively given to Giant Tortoise from Arabian Nights, making that the oldest creature that's a turtle. As a reflection of their slow, armored nature, turtles in Magic often have high toughness. Overall, turtles have been very successful at Magic's highest level of competition. There are 42 cards that have the turtle creature type or create a turtle creature token, and in this video we'll look at the 10 that have left the biggest impact on competitive Magic. This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. Use the links in the description to visit their store. Before we get started, here's a quick reminder on how I score cards in these videos. A first tier top 8 is worth 2 points. This includes events like Pro Tours. And a second tier top 8 is worth 1 point. This includes events like regional championships. At number 10, it's Dragon Turtle, one of a handful of creatures in Magic that have the exact same name as they do creature types. For 1 generic and 2 blue, it's a 3/5 with flash, and when it enters the battlefield, you tap it and up to 1 target creature an opponent controls, and they don't untap during their controller's next untap steps. Those stats are definitely above rate, but this card has a pretty interesting design, because it doesn't let you take advantage of that stat line immediately, instead functioning as a removal spell of sorts. Provided you play it on your opponent's turn, your turtle untaps before the thing it taps down does, so it gives you some good tempo overall. Its points have all come in Dimir control decks in both Standard and Pioneer, but it doesn't have any top finishes since 2022. There's a pretty good chance that Fecund Green Shell passes Dragon Turtle in the near future. At number 9, it's Yidaro Wandering Monster. The biggest creature on the list, this dinosaur turtle is 5 generic and 2 red for an 8/8 with trample and haste, and you can pay 1 generic and a red to cycle it, which means you can pay that cost and discard it from your hand to draw a card. And when Yidaro gets cycled, you shuffle it into your library, and if you've cycled a Yidaro 4 or more times in the game, you put Yidaro onto the battlefield instead. So yeah, he's a huge monster that's pretty efficient to begin with, but if you have cycled Yidaros enough, you can effectively pay 1 generic and a red, draw a card, and put Yidaro directly on the battlefield. And you can even do it at instant speed. Because it's cycling, your opponent also has very limited options to interact with it. Yidaro's points have all come in Standard, with most of its points coming in cycling decks, which ran lots of payoffs for cycling, like Flourishing Fox and Draenith Stinger. This obviously makes Yidaro's cycle ability even more potent, but Yidaro hasn't gained any points since rotating out of Standard. At number 8, it's Calcite Snapper. For 1 generic and 2 blue, it's a 1/4 with Shroud, which means no one can target it with spells or abilities. It's the first of many turtles on the list to have a keyword ability that makes them difficult to target, something that is supposed to reflect their defensive capabilities. In addition to Shroud, the Snapper also has Landfall, and when a land enters a battlefield under your control, you can switch its power and toughness. In other words, it can be a 4/1 if you want it to be. All of Calcite Snapper's points came in Standard between 2010 and 2011, where it was typically played in control decks. It was especially good against other control decks, since dealing with the Snapper was pretty hard for any deck that was low on creatures, and it could hit pretty hard. But it saw lots of main deck play too, since it was a decent defensive roadblock for aggro decks, and you could start turning it sideways as your win condition once you gain control of the game. Calcite Snapper hasn't put up any top finishes since 2011 though. At number 7, it's Sailor's Bane. This dragon turtle is 7 generic and 2 blue for a 7/7, and it comes with Ward 4, and it costs 1 generic less to cast for each card you own in exile and in your graveyard that's an instant sorcery or adventure. So if you're good at putting those cards into your graveyard or into exile, casting the Bane can be incredibly easy, and it's pretty nice when you get a huge ward creature that is difficult to kill efficiently. Sailor's Bane is from Commander Legends Battle for Baldur's Gate, and that means the only 60 card formats it's legal in are Legacy and Vintage, and it's proven to be good enough to see play in the former, where it's appeared in Delver of Secrets decks. These decks are all about jamming a bunch of cheap instants and sorceries to put something into play early like Murktide Regent. One of the great things about Sailor's Bane compared to other cards that cost less based on instants and sorceries is that most of them only check the graveyard, but you can cast Murktide Regent and exile all of your instants and sorceries and still get a huge discount on Sailor's Bane. However, so far in 2024, Sailor's Bane doesn't have any top 8s. At number 6, it's Kogla in Yidaro. This is the same Yidaro that we saw earlier, and this time he's teaming up with fellow Ikoria resident Kogla during the Phyrexian invasion March of the Machine. Anyway, these team-up legends all have effects that are meant to reflect the original legendary creature cards, and that's certainly what we have here. For 2 generic, 2 red, and 2 green, it's a 7/7, and when it enters, you can choose to give it trample and haste until end of turn, or have it fight a creature you don't control. You can also pay 2 generic, a red, and a green, and discard it to destroy up to 1 target artifact or enchantment, and then shuffle Kogla and Yidaro into your library from your graveyard and draw a card. So yeah, it's a huge creature that can come down and remove a creature or smash in for 7 right away, and earlier in the game you can effectively cycle it away and get a naturalize effect. Kogla and Yidaro has found success in both Standard and Modern. In Standard, it's been a sideboard card in 5-color control decks, where it's a win condition worth bringing in against opponents with lots of targets for the discard ability. And in Modern, it's been played in Amulet Titan decks. Those decks use Amulet of Vigor and Bounce lands to produce tons of mana in the early game, and while the deck's ideal play tends to be Primeval Titan, Yidaro gets sided in against opponents who have targets for Kogla and Yidaro's activated ability. Kogla and Yidaro is likely to continue to gain points, and it's going to move higher on this list in the future. At number 5, it's Quandrix Cultivator. For 1 generic, a green, a blue-green hybrid mana, and a blue mana, it's a 3/4, and when it enters the battlefield, you can search up a basic forest or island and put it onto the battlefield and then shuffle. Notably, that land enters the battlefield untapped, unlike most versions of this effect. Overall, the Cultivator is a pretty sweet ramp creature, since it's got a more significant body than most creatures that can search up lands. The Cultivator gained all of its points in the Standard of 2021, where it was played in Emergent Ultimatum decks. These were ramp decks that looked to cast a powerful ultimatum early, and search up game-breaking cards with it to put the opponent in a situation where there were no good choices. And the Cultivator could help you get there a full turn earlier. However, Quandrix Cultivator hasn't put up any top 8s since 2021. At number 4, it's Blossoming Tortoise, the newest turtle on the list. For 2 generic and 2 green, it's a 3/3, and when it enters or attacks, you mill 3, and then return a land from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. It also decreases the cost of your land's activated abilities by 1 generic, and gives all land creatures +1/+1. So, this is a tortoise that loves lands, helping you load your graveyard and ramp every time it enters or attacks, while also making your non-basic lands a lot better, especially if they're creature lands. The tortoise quickly found a home in Golgari mid-range and Standard. These decks ran lots of non-basic lands, like Mishra's Foundry and Restless Cottage. Basically, the tortoise provides really sweet value in a vacuum, especially in a deck with a graveyard sub-theme, while making your lands a lot better. The tortoise has also already done some work in Pioneer, where it's played in Devotion to green decks. It's pretty great alongside Nykthos, since it not only contributes to green Devotion, it makes the land even more efficient at producing mana by reducing the cost of that activated ability. The tortoise is going to keep on gaining points in Standard and Pioneer, and while the 3 cards in front of it do have significant leads, the tortoise is likely to move higher on this list in the future. At number 3, it's Chimeric Idol. For 3 generic mana, it's an artifact, but you can pay 0 mana and tap all of your lands to make it a 3/3 turtle artifact creature until end of turn. That's pretty far from being impressive by today's standards. It's basically a 3 mana 3/3 that takes some extra work, but back in the year 2000, the Idol was a super efficient creature, and for a lot of decks, tapping all your lands wasn't that big of a downside. Plus, the fact that it wasn't always a creature actually made it pretty good against board sweepers, kind of like how vehicles are today. It's hard to believe today, but it was one of the best aggro cards in Standard between 2000 and 2002. At number 2, it's Kappa Cannoneer. For 5 generic and a blue, it's a 4/4 with Improvise, which means you can tap your artifacts to help cast it, and each artifact you tap pays for 1 generic of the Cannoneer's casting cost. It comes with Ward 4, and when it or another artifact enters, you put a +1/+1 counter on the Cannoneer, and it can't be blocked this turn. So this is a turtle that loves artifacts, since it can use them to come down ahead of schedule, and once it's in play, it can use them to rapidly grow. This makes the Cannoneer a really scary threat, especially because it's difficult to interact with, in combat or otherwise. The Cannoneer is from a Commander set, so for a while it was only legal in Legacy and Vintage, but it recently got printed in Modern Horizons 3, so now it's legal in Modern too. Unsurprisingly, the Cannoneer has seen play in all 3 of those formats where it often appears in artifact decks. It's going to keep on gaining points in the future, and it's got a good chance at being number 1 one day. For now though, that number 1 card is Colossal Sky Turtle. This turtle is an enchantment creature that costs 4 generic, 2 green, and a blue, and it's a bit unusual for a turtle since it has higher power than toughness as a 6/5. It also comes with Ward 2 and has 2 separate channel options, which means you can pay those costs and discard it from your hand for an effect. In this case, you can pay 2 generic and a green to return a card from your graveyard to your hand, or 1 generic and a blue to bounce a creature. The Sky Turtle is a super flexible card, since it can have a meaningful spell-like effect when you need it to, but it can also be a huge threat when that's what you need. While it was in Standard, it was played in Temur control decks, but it's done the most work in Modern where it's played in Living End. These decks are all about discarding creatures for value in the early game, like by channeling them, and then cascading into Living End to destroy all the creatures on the battlefield and reanimate everything in the graveyard. So you can channel the turtle early and then reanimate it later, which is pretty nasty, especially because it's usually joined by all manner of other large cycling creatures. While Cascade decks have taken a hit in Modern as a result of the banning of Violent Outburst, the ban didn't extinguish the deck entirely, and the turtle is still seeing play in Modern. It's likely to come down to either Colossal Sky Turtle or Kappa Cannoneer at the top of this list in the long run. So those are Magic's best turtles. If you want to own any of these tough reptiles, check out the description where you can find a direct Card Kingdom link for each card that appeared in the video. If you want to make sure you catch future videos, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. And if you want to catch up on past videos, including many more that look at creatures with specific creature types, you should see a playlist on your screen shortly. Thanks for watching.